Okay. Now let's say on one graph or another we have two points, fundamental triangle between them. And this point is, let's say, 8, 13, and this point is 12, 11. Okay? What are the legs of that triangle? What's the rise and what's the run? First place, what do you do before you do anything? You decide the direction. We're going this way. So, if we go from here to here, what's the rise? Now, we did this last time in detail, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now. Looks to me like the rise is -2. And the run is 12 minus 8, which is 4. And that should be totally obvious to you. If it isn't, review the video from last time, whatever. Okay? So the slope is rise over run equals -2 over 4, which equals -1/2. And that's what we'll put the box around, because we put a rectangle around the slope. Everybody okay with that? You should be. If you're not, make sure you review it and get good with it. Yes?
Is it bad to switch back and forth between fractions and decimals?
Between what?
Fractions
and decimals. If you can write it as an exact fraction that you understand, as opposed to something like 792 over 191, okay? Then I think it's kind of better to use the exact fraction, because if your fraction was 2/3, you'd have to round it off or write it as a repeating decimal. Either way, it can be a little harder to understand. But it's more or less optional. Still, if it's an exact fraction with numbers less than 20, probably ought to write it as a fraction. Okay, now, that's a good question, but I'm going to go on now. Okay, now, and there's explicit instruction in your assignment for next time. What to do here. I'm going to extend this ways to the right and a ways to the left. And now a little ways on one side or the other, and I've got more room on the right than I've got on the left, so I'll go to the right. I'm going to put a point. And I'm going to label this point X, Y. Okay? And I'm going to make a fundamental triangle at this point, and either one of these points, it doesn't matter which. Okay? Which point do you want me to make the fundamental triangle with? This one or this one? Which one would you make? With this point? Okay. One most people would make, but it wouldn't make any difference in your results. It does make a difference in the rise and the run, okay? So, what's the rise? Actually, I don't like that. I want to make this one. So I just realized I've got run over here, and I'm going to have to label the rise here, and I don't really have room to label it. So it's a little neater if I make it here, but it's not wrong, as long as you got room to label it. I've got the choice. So what's the run? I'm going to go in this direction, because default direction is kind of left to right. What's the run of this triangle?
Y minus 11?
That would be...
No, x minus 12.
Yeah. Did I say rise or run? I
See
don't
why I
know.
have so many
I'm gonna do the
questions.
run. Run's x minus 12, and you should know that very well because of the first question on the major quiz that I had you work for this time, right? Where I gave you symbols. And the rise is y minus 11. So the slope, well, what's the slope? And that is what? Yeah. So it's rise over run, so you're going to divide this by this. So it's going to be y minus 11 over x minus 12. And if I put a box around it, I don't even have to say that it's the rise. The box tells me that it's the rise. So you got less to write if you put that little rectangle around it. It's quicker to make the rectangle than it is to write out the word rise. And now we know what this means and what this means, okay? Now, this is a straight line here, it's supposed to be. It's supposed to represent a straight line. What do you know about the slope of a straight line? It's always the same between any 2 points, right? So if this is a straight line, the slopes are equal. Okay? And from that, what can you say then? Can you write an equation? Something up here that equals something else up here, if this is a straight line. Yeah. Means this slope has to be the same as this slope, right? This is the slope of the line. This is the slope of the line. Okay? Has to be so if xy is on the line through these 2 points. Because if it's on the line through these 2 points, then the slope from either of these points out to xy has to be the same as the slope here. That makes sense? Because the slopes always have to be the same. Okay, so So that's the equation of the line. Now what's a standard way you do the equation of a straight line? What's the standard form? Anybody remember? Any form of the equation of a straight line? Probably because you learned it long enough to circle the right number on a test and then immediately forgot it. Although I think most people kind of have an inkling. He might be right, he might be wrong. I would suspect a lot of you would be right. But not everybody would. But nobody understands this logic because nobody ever teaches this logic to people who are being taught to circle the right number on a test and then forget it. Okay? This is a deeper understanding of the equation of a straight line. Now the standard for a straight line what's the y equals mx plus b form of this line? You know about y equals mx plus b, everybody knows. If you didn't remember it, you know it now. Okay? Well, how are you going to get the y equals mx plus b form? Just solve for y. You've got y minus 11 over x minus 12 equals negative 1/2. So y minus 11 equals x minus 12 times negative 1/2. Now, there's a step in there that you would have to fill in. I would multiply both sides by my denominator, and probably by this denominator too, but in this case, I'm not going to. Okay? And it follows that y equals x minus 12 times negative 1/2 plus 11. Just very straightforward steps. So that y equals negative 1/2 x by the distributive law, negative 1/2 times x, and then plus negative 1/2 times negative 12, well that's plus 6 plus 11, so that y is negative 1/2 x plus 17. So if we have this, we can easily get this. Okay? Now there are formulas, point slope formula, point formula. They all boil down to this, and they all boil down to this, and we don't need them. And if I ask you to do the equation of a straight line using the slope equals slope form, I mean you do this. If I don't say, you can do it any way you want to. Okay? It's perfectly valid, but I want you to understand this. Okay, you'll see how this arises in the homework I'll give you for next time. And there's an example there, incidentally, of how you maximize revenue with a simple revenue versus demand function. You don't have to understand those terms. You'll find that it's pretty simple and hopefully gives you an even better idea of why we're doing all this.